Yes, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the fourth and last day of this conference. Time has gone really fast. Interesting discussions have been taking place, and many of the topics of the conference have been talked, understandably from the context of verbal languages. But as we all know, there are other significant ways of communication, such as music, which we all take part in one way or another. At least from the viewpoint of music education, all of us, with maybe some few exceptions, are musicians. Maybe not performers or composers on the spot, but at least we listen fluently to our own self-selected musics. Therefore, it gives me a great pleasure to introduce today's plenary lecturer, who is a professor of psychology of perception, psychology of music, and psychology of communication at the Università di Bologna. He has pursued extensive work in these fields and published on a variety of topics such as motivation and regulation of emotions, communication of doubt through facial expressions, art therapy and humor, quantitative and qualitative data in music therapy research, and growing with music from body to musical thinking. Today, he will shed light on the topic of images and narratives in non-verbal languages. So please join me in welcoming Professor Roberto Caterina.
Thank you, Professor Ayala, for your nice presentation. Thanks to everybody, and thanks to Dario Martinelli, of course, who was so kind to invite me today. The topic of my lecture will be about proto-narrative elements in non-verbal languages. I divide my talk in two parts. The first part, we are going to examine the role of images in proto-narrative non-verbal languages. In the second part, I can try to see how these non-verbal elements can have a therapeutic role in art therapy and music therapy. Let's start then. So, just to start, we can say that narration can be fully expressed only by verbal language. Nevertheless, many non-verbal languages, especially music, may be considered as proto-narrative insofar as they suggest a linear sequence from a starting point to an end, according to works by Nattier, Agau. What does proto-narrative mean? It means that to be completely narrative, music needs language. You can see in songs, of course, you can see in opera, you can see even instrumental music when you have a title, because that tells you what the music is about. In this context, images have an important role in a narrative language, and we can see now in the first part of our lecture why images are important in proto-narrative languages. So, when we go to images, we get an unstable image, because images can be regarded as an unstable bridge toward knowledge. Where does idea of instability come from? That's the first question. And the second question is, why are images important in narration and in proto-narrative languages? So let's start. Let's answer the first question: why the images are unstable? And you have a first reply to this question. You can find in Plato, of course, because in the idea of forms, in the allegory cave, Plato believed that a true reality existed beyond the normal perception of the world. What we perceive around us is just a shadow of this truth, and images are only imperfect copies of the reality. So you know about that. There are some funny pictures about this, that you have the ideal perfect cut in your mind and your soul, but you have to deal with imperfect cuts in the real world. So just to give, well, the answer by Plato is a cognitive answer to the instability of images. Other philosophers, especially in the Christian tradition and Augustine of Hippo, gave a more complex answer, because they considered not only the cognitive value of images, but also their emotional value. And what Augustine of Hippo did was to integrate the relationship between image and vision. So when you go from image to vision, you can see that vision is a mystical experience that goes beyond sensation. And vision comes from the unique and the creative idea of love. In the Christian tradition, and in Augustine particularly, this concept of love comes. And it's very important for the religion in itself and for the consequences in all our way of thinking, because this principle of love has to deal with our emotional nature, of course. And according to Augustine, we have three types of vision. An outward vision, which is called the vision corporalis. The vision comes out from our body, so we see our distant objects that are present at our side. But there are other types of visions which are inward visions. The inward visions, like visio spiritualis, is a mental representation of absent people or objects. So I can figure in my mind an absent object, and I have the vision of that object, and this is an inward vision. But inward vision is not only a cognitive one, and that's the particular aspect Agostino indicated. It can be also a creative activity, a vision that we find in our soul by creating something. It's not only imagining something. So this is the visio intellectualis. That is an act of creation, actually. And this act of creation has to do with the concept of love. It's important, Agostino, as a philosopher, also for music, because of course his work, the music, most of you know, was so important for the religious tradition too, because then music was appreciated in Christian tradition. So when we want to translate this old past in modern terms, we can see that the idea of God's love means that we can see not only with our eyes, but also with our heart, and we can hear our hidden emotion. So we can go now to a reply to the second aspect of instability that images are dealing with, because that instability regards emotion, regards feelings, and so the images are unstable because they are a representation of a principle of love, so to speak. In these respects, it's very important some mystical tradition in Europe. Meister Eckhart was a very famous philosopher. It has a center of Dante's works too. And Meister Eckhart, well, comes just after Agostino's thoughts, and he thinks that we have to indicate what the images go to. And the images, in a way, are unstable and have to disappear in God's vision. When we see God, there is no place for images. The vision of God is beyond images, because a direct relationship doesn't need images. Nevertheless, images are first important step for knowledge. And these are two quotations by Meister Eckhart. The eye with I see God is the same with God sees me. My eye and God's eye is one eye and one sight and one knowledge and one love. And with God we can use only the language of angels, just to communicate with God. The man who will pray it right should ask for nothing. That's the conclusion of Meister Eckhart's philosophic point of view, which is very close to Eastern philosophy, so to speak. And another point comes from the Neoplatonic ideas in Florence, in humanist students. And in the circle of Marsilio Ficino, we have Yehuda Abravanel, who is very important because he just wrote a sort of handbook on love. And what he did was just to consider the relationship between heart and the imagination. So imagine are not only linked to love, but they are linked in love insofar as they can be artistic representations. So the products of imagination, images, are very important on an aesthetic level. Following Ficino, Abravanel argues that the artist, more specifically the artist's imagination, becomes the vessel through which God speaks. So God speaks, we can hear God because we have the artists, and the artists are the interpreters of images, so to speak. And here are two quotations. These quotations is quite long, but I let you read, but I would like now to just say that in this quotation we find that when we are talking about images, we are not only talking about sight, but we are talking, it also found in objects of hearing, such as beautiful oratory, voice, speech, song, music, consonance, proportion, and harmony. So that's the other aspect of vision. Vision has not to do only with eyes. And the second quotation is very important because it gives actually the answer to the instability of vision. And this quotation is, God has implanted his image and likeness in his creatures through the finite beauty imparted to them from his surpassing beauty. And the image of the infinite must be finite, otherwise it would not be a copy, but that of which of it is the image. The infinite beauty of the Creator is depicted and reflected in finite created beauty, like a beautiful face in a mirror, and although the image is not commensurate with its divine pattern, nevertheless it will be its copy, portrait and true likeness. So, in this quotation you can see that the instability of images is just to be found in the conflict between finite and infinite. So, in this conflict between finite and infinite, we have that's just the place where emotions are. In the images that are present in the artistic works that are finite, we can find some infinitive elements. The infinitive elements belongs to the emotions. So the artist is so clever to give us the idea of infinitive using finite means. And so this is what has been studied in the psychological tradition, especially in psychoanalytical tradition, some years ago by Matt Blanco, with the ideas of emotion as infinite sets. But Blanco was saying that what Freud did was, yes, when he was talking about unconscious, really he was talking about emotions. And so if we can interpret Freud's ideas about unconscious as emotions, we can understand this finite, infinite relationship. So we go now to the second element. When we see the finite, infinite relationship, we can see that this finite, infinite relationship belongs to two different ideas of time. These two different ideas of time come once again to Augustine, who just described this concept. We have emotional time belongs to psychological time, according to Augustine tradition. In psychological time, past, present, and future dimension are on the same axis. You can see the past as the future in the mental representation. And emotional time has to do with past memories, present sensation, and the future expectation. On the other hand, emotional time is different from the chronological time. Chronological time has to do with before and after relationship and other finite relationship. While in the emotional time, the infinite relationship are dealing with. So in the emotional time, we have infinite relationship and emotional relationship, whilst in the finite time, we have chronological aspects or before aspects relation. Well, coming back to proto-narrative languages, narrative is often influenced by emotion in two ways. Emotions can be included in the tension relaxation process in musical structure, like in tonal harmony, of course. And or emotion can be elicited by images and their symbolic values and meanings. So, when the tension relaxation process is dominant, proto-narrative can be organized in temporal structures and in before-after successions. In other terms, a story can be told and organized in different steps and passages according to some rules and variations. We can see this in a part of the preparatory material for a study we presented in the Congress. It's a light material, so I would like now just to show you. In this example, we created a story, a fairy tale, on an original melody by Haydn. We introduced in the melody a modulation from major to minor. We changed the end from tonic to dominant, and we rearranged the melody in a sort of fuzzy sets. So we have four conditions. In all the conditions, we changed the story accordingly. So, for example, that was the original melody, is here on the right. That's the story I made up. So the story is a simple story. Semolina was a little girl who was going cheerfully but steadily into fields and woods. She walked around the flowers and made them a nice reverence. And the flowers opened one by one and said, "Good morning, Semolina." Semolina raised her head. She had a song. It was her friend Picchio. "You sing so well," said Semolina. "Thank you," he replied. "It's nice to see you. If you go right, you'll meet your friend Martino waiting for you along the river." Semolina reached Martino and they played all the day. And so you can see this movement in the music. I hope we can listen. Sorry about that. Yeah, we are, yes. Okay, so you can see that the structure goes through the narration. Of course, I made words, so I made the story. But in the music, there is this strength towards narration. So going to the second, to the modulation from major to minor, you can see that the story is more or less the same, but we change in this point. When Semolina meets Picchio, she had a rather sad song. It was her friend Picchio who had fallen and had broken wing. "Hello, Semolina," Picchio said. "I am not well, but it will pass." So that's the modulation in minor, and then I hope we can hear. It takes some time. Yeah. So in the third condition, we had the ending with the dominant chord, and here we have, of course, a different ending. We had a surprise ending, so to speak. So Picchio told Semolina to meet her friend Martino, but Semolina asked, "But how is that possible? I just saw him in town, and he told me that we had met for lunch by his own." But maybe. So the final, in this case, is not certain, but it has to do with a suspense. What happens next? That's so. And the final condition this is more artistic, so to speak, in an ironic way, is a sort of random arrangement of melodies. And so the story too is randomly arranged. So Semolina was a little girl who was walking steadily in the woods. That day it was raining and the flowers were taking tea. Her pack was very heavy, but Semolina managed to get to her aunt's house. Picchio was singing, Semolina was glad to see him, and he told her, "Be careful, now the path is slippery." Semolina replied, "Sunday, I should go." Picchio, raising his head slightly, whispered, "Semolina." And so we can now just see how it works in music. Sort of Alice story. So, going back to our presentation, from the previous example, we can say that True narration can be properly set only when language is present. As I told before, different stories can be created for the same music, as in parodies, of course. Images that are present in the story, fields, woods, flowers, river, and so on, can be either coherently or incoherently organized. Even in the case of incoherent organization, like in the random condition, the sense of narration is not lost. It looks like a dream when it's recalled to memory. So, our story suggests that the before-after relationship has to do with the strong hierarchical organization that we can find in the language as well as in the music, around the axis of tension and relaxation. According to Imberti, this strong organization has to do with the schemata of order relations. Schemata of order relation are strictly linked with the time flow and direction from past to present, which has not necessarily to do with sound presentation order, but with the order we give to the sound in our mind. That's the important part. So we can have that proto-narrative goes towards past memories, and so they are organized towards a cognition activity. According to the neurologist Damasio, we are in the realm of feelings in these respects. But there are some other schemata. Schemata of order, as I said before, images not necessarily should be connected with the proto-narrative stream. On the contrary, very often images destroy the narration, have the strength to suspend the narration. And images can stay in a sort of atemporal dimension, and in this dimension only the presence, the here and now, the instant are important. The only order which can be followed is that of different sensations that come one before and after the other. So, in this realm, we have that body arousal is the most important thing, and sensation and perception. So, these are the main aspects of schemata of order. And according to Damasio, we are in the realm of emotions, as if we can see emotion more linked to bodily sensation. So, according to Imberti, schemata of order relation are more common in romantic tradition, like in Brahms, where you have a tension-relaxation axis. Schemata of order are typically of Debussy symbolism, where temporality is dissolved. For example, we can consider two famous examples. One is Love Dream, Liebstraum by Liszt. You can see that is a marvelous description where you can find a movement going towards an end. Not like in Semolina, but the structure is the same in a way. When in an example like the girl with flaxen hair by Debussy, you see that images stand on their own. Just now, well, I hope to have time, but just for a second, I would like to if I have time, to show you the beginning of this work. And you see the beginning begins with a long note. Long is D flat note at the beginning of this, as far as I remember. We'll see now, and you see that this gives you this suspension. How different is from Haydn piece we have seen before. It gives you just the idea of this image that come from an unseen reality. From the original ideas of psychotherapy to the modern form of art therapy. Narrative is clearly present in the first psychoanalytical works. Case histories are like novels. Freud wanted to tell us the reality, the real story, which was behind repression. And construction and reconstruction of stories come from his clinical examples. But on the other hand, in psychoanalytical practice, present moments became very important when psychoanalysts started to analyze the therapist-patient relationship. The past was important, but even more essential was to understand how past could be reenacted in the here and now of the session. Emotion, ineffable moments of contact between therapists and patients belong to the therapeutic space which is built in the present situation. Jung was different in this respect from Freud because in Jung, his therapy used the images coming from dreams of patients. His theory of archetypes is strictly linked to the images. And where do the images come from? We can see that the image come and it's strange this comparison, come from dreams, especially when before you are going to sleep and before you awake, and listening to music. Listening to music can induce a deep body arousal, like shivers, frissons, and can elicit images which are similar to those present in dreams. So that was somehow important to know, and many of musicotherapy programs are just made on this capacity of music to elicit images. And music can elicit image, especially when the structure of music is not so tight as we have seen before. In case of psychotic patients or in other cases where it's difficult to use verbal languages, non-verbal signs such as images become important tools to use the communication between therapists and patients. Narration can be hampered, stopped, also in the case of repetition compulsion behaviors in traumatic neurosis. And images can be used just to reach a deeper insight as in Jungian individuation process. So we can use images just to restart a new narration. That's the reason why images can be therapeutic in a way. That's the individuation process, which is a process of integration of the unconscious and conscious in Jung's terms. But now these ideas are utilized by new art therapies. New art therapies are focused on images, especially phototherapy and collage. In phototherapy techniques, are art therapy techniques that use people's personal snapshots, family albums, pictures taken by others, memories, and so on, as catalysts to deepen insight and to enhance communication during their therapy or counseling sessions, conducted by trained mental health professionals in ways not possible using words alone. In collage, the patient creates a piece of art by combining images such as magazine pictures. Collage is a great activity for art therapy because it feels less threatening to patients than other art activities like painting and drawings. Collage pictures can be a great way for a patient to find an image that represents what they want to say. It can also be a great way to spark new ideas and to stimulate thought. As patients look through a selection of images, they are engaged in thought and reflection. Another new application of videotherapy technique is called video dream. This method focuses on a group work based on one participant's dream, a sort of collective dramatization introduced by an evolution of gestaltic role play. Video dream is a work developing at more levels. The basis, there is a dramatization with all its relation rules between the therapist and the dreamer in a group context. In another level, the therapist participates to the client's work before by adding the video camera and after by stimulating the use of kinematic language to cure. In all this new art therapist technique, images are used not only for the reconstruction of the past, that could be used in a defense way, in the sense that we reconstruct the past we like, of course, but above all, for a new form of narration that can reach the most vital and true part of the self, analogous with the Jungian individuation process, and even more with the soul-making therapeutic approach by Hillman, the basis of which is our ability to see people, to see things, people, places and events that we daily perceive that are a dream within a dream, using a Shakespeare metaphor, so to speak. And sound, when we are talking about music, we often talk about sound images. When we talk about sound images, we refer to images that come to our mind when we listen to music. We have two types of sound image. The sound image is a mental representation of sound, or it may be an image which has been elicited by the sounds. There are two different things, but they together linked with images. In many experiences, it has been proven that music can elicit vivid images. And these images are often like atemporal dream images. That experience was made by a musicotherapist, which was Ellen Bonney, in the 1970s. During those years, in the United States, many people used LSD and other addicted substances, which elicited images. And what Helen Bonney discovered, that it was not necessary LSD. Music was enough to elicit vivid images. And on this basis, just he formulated a sort of therapeutic protocol. So he asked patients to listen to music. He had many programs of classical music. And during these programs of classical music, she was able to ask the patients what the images they were seeing in that moment were, to discuss with them, and so to talk with them about this image. And talking with them about this image was a sort of a therapeutic reconstruction of narration, so to speak. So in this case, music therapy can be said as a therapeutic reconstruction of a narration starting from images. Of course, not all the patients can do that. Only the patients which can speak can verbalize what they say or what they see. But in a way, it was an important reflection. So it was characterized by the use of special Western classical music. This is, for example, a program, you see, that was Elgar's Enigma Variations, Laudate Domini Mozart's, Barber's Adagio, Gounod's Offertory, Death and Transfiguration by Richard Strauss. So quite a long program. And during this long program, all these images were going toward transcendency, so to speak. So at the end, we had these transcendental images we are coming. So just to go to the conclusion, so time perspective wide extension from past memories to future expectation in proto-narrative language had to do with strong hierarchy structures. On the other hand, weak structures are more suitable to describe present or dreamy images that are dealing with the here and now situation. The present moment has been studied by psychoanalyst Stern, who has been quoted by Imberti very often. In this talk, different therapeutic instruments have been described. In particular, the relationship between images and music has been considered in the light of a new narrative context where body arousal and emotion can be seen in terms of strong and peak experiences. So, just conclude. So, thank you for your attention.
Again, we have some time for questions.
Thank you very much. It was very exciting. I just liked very much your very broad use that you have the historic aspect and then this theory and this experimental and the even application in your theory. It's very exciting. Just had two comments. So the first one is about this idea of proto-narrativity, because you obviously follow Nattier, you say that music has only proto-narrative, but you have to think that music is really narrative. Not only proto, but real narrative. The only thing is that this narrative is not verbal one in music. It takes place by other, let's say, purely musical means. So I would say that music is narrative definitely by its essence. That's first. And the second is on the concept of image, because for me image is something rather visual, whereas obviously what music arouses in us might be or something more general, like let's say Plato had idea or something, or the Germans they speak of Vorstellungen or Empfindungen, which are very general, not only visual. So I mean that if you use the term image, you very easily combine just the music and the visual field. Whereas I think that the musical semantic context is of more general nature than just visual.
So, for the first part, yes, I would agree with you. It depends on which idea of narrative you have. When I was talking about proto-narrative aspects of music, I was just considering the strong relationship which there is between music and the language. Almost all music, except just a small amount of music, is without language. So music and language go together. It's a very good marriage, a happier marriage than other marriage, like, for example, art and psychology. Art is a very unhappy marriage, but whilst music and language is a happy marriage. Because really, language has something that music has not, and vice versa. So they compenetrate. And so what I was, well, I was not, of course, I didn't want to tell that music has not the possibility to give you meaning. Of course, there is meaning in music. But when we talk about meaning, not necessarily we talk about narration, at least as far as I see, because meaning can be emotional, can have many other aspects. Of course, there is an intrinsic meaning of music which goes beyond language. It's well known, the example of Beethoven. Beethoven was asked, what does it mean? And so Beethoven played the game, just to tell what that was not possible to tell by words what was the musical meaning. So, but if we are dealing with a story, we need language. Even in instrumental music, for example, you have Liszt Mazeppa. Well, you have to know who was Mazeppa. You have to tell Mazeppa people. Otherwise, it was impossible to understand that music has to do with that Hungarian hero. So, that, according to my opinion. The second is about images. Yes, I agree with you. Well, what I selected in the philosophical very wide literature, I just selected the passage between image and vision, because they are similar, but vision has these creative elements which images only have not. That was my idea. Thanks you very much.
We still have time for other questions, comments. Dario, please.
First of all, thank you very much, Roberto, for your lecture. It reminded me of something like 20 years ago when I was in your classes in Bologna. I just wanted to continue on the question of images, because we often have this conversation with my students, and there's always a point when I'm talking about perception and other things, when I point out how the human species tend to be very much based on visual representations in their sensorial experience of the world. And very often we make these little games of asking to imagine something that is absolutely out of this world, like nothingness, the idea of nothingness. And I ask them, so, yes, what do you imagine? What happens in your brain? And very often there are images of colors or anyway visual experiences. So I wonder if after all it's possible at all to emancipate from a visual form of experience of the world as human beings. If we turn to other species, I'm sure that this is possible. When we think about dogs, I'm sure that most of the way of experiences the world is of olfactive type. I think that they are smelling much more than they are seeing in the world. So I wonder, is it possible at all to emancipate from visuality in the human?
Well, I really agree with you very much, because in a way I think that images are a blessing and a damnation at the same time, because you have to use and to get rid of them as well. And so what all the mystical do actually, and even some famous poets like Dante, for example, in his vision of God, he just says this. He takes from Eckhart, and so he has this vision of colors, and what he says that the images are not necessary in this vision of God. So that's I quite agree with you. About the reflection of other species and olfactory qualities, well, I would very much agree with you. I would like to do a study about that. Difficult to organize, but I think would be very interesting indeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. At this point, I will steal a question. The four examples of Haydn and elaborated Haydn come across to me as very fascinating ways of doing a sort of empirical aesthetics. So would you like to elaborate on how this kind of design of optional paths of narratives could or have been used in both research, on the other hand, such as aesthetics, and in particular in therapy, and what is the role of the patient or customer in such an occasion? Like, could you elaborate on that?
Yes, I do. Well, so I use these stories like, well, it started like a joke actually, because I was with my colleague Mario Baroni. He took the music from Haydn, he adapted, of course, the music by Haydn, and I wrote a story on it, because I had just in mind not to write lyrics for a song, or so but just a story that could fit with the musical movements. And is just what I did. And well, it worked in a way. It was very nice. And well, we used only for this research. Then we had other things, other ideas, and so we left it out. But I use often in educational context. So when you have to teach people what is major mode, what is minor, and so how can you modulate from major to minor, these things can be useful, just to give you some grammatical musical rules in a way. Well, in the research, yes, and therapeutic is more difficult because you must have patients who knows music, at least musical grammar. Otherwise, it would be difficult to follow them. But even so, I think that that it can be. I didn't think about that, but I think it's a very interesting idea. Why not? Thanks so very much for this suggestion. Thanks.
I think we have still time for one or two questions or commentaries. Yes, please.
It's so exciting topic, so thank you very much for. But just this, this narrativity. If you are a musician and you want to learn a new piece, then musicians often very naively they imagine some narrative, which helps a lot to their interpretation. So, and then this narrative can be whatsoever indeed. So it's important part of musical practice. But on the other hand, when we come to science, we must make a meta language whereby we portray this phenomenon, and then depends very much which kind of concepts. The music is somehow conceptualized. I just refer that in the in the grammar school we have these modalities which are be do close to your tensional aspects which are important. So that I mean there are languages whereby we can portray this rather abstract narrativity of music.
Yes, so I agree with you. Of course, it's a very good point. That's well, I didn't go so further in that. I just limited to the first aspect of imagination. But I agree with you that this more scientific way of looking at musical language should be regarded as a fruitful one. Yes, I thank you very much for your suggestion.
Any more questions or comments? We can, of course, continue this over the upcoming coffee break. Okay, I think we'll proceed to the coffee break. So thank you for the attendance of this morning's keynote plenary lecture. Thank you for the discussions, and in particular, thank you for the presentation, Professor Caterina.